Hello and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 44. My name's Annaschmidt and I'm here every week. Yes, you are stuck with me every week. And I share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. Seriously, they don't. I love my perspective and I love sharing it with you. And today I have a family's experience about a 3.5-year-old girl and her sudden extreme behavioural changes that were starting to concern her family. Now, Jenny the mum is a good friend of mine and she wanted to share this experience to highlight paranormal attachment and what she witnessed over 2 weeks within her daughter's extreme behavioural changes. She knew that it wasn't medical, it wasn't mental health, it was an energetic issue. Now, Jenny has called her recount of her family's harrowing experience the darkness within. Now, Jenny wrote down her experience for me, and she writes, I organised a day to have lunch with Anna for a chat and to enjoy some spring sunshine. My daughter Gracie was home from daycare that day and came out to lunch with us. Now, Gracie's 3.5 and a happy and well-loved little girl. She recently started daycare so that I could go back to work. Now, Gracie settled into daycare easily and was really excited to go every week. She loved it, and I was happy to see her enjoying daycare so much. Now, Gracie is a real daddy's girl. She really loves Steve. Every day he comes home from work and he's greeted by Gracie, who is thrilled to see him. They play and she generally sticks with Dad like glue when he's at home. Now, one day, all this changed. Gracie gradually started to stick with me when Steve came home, which was really unusual as she loved her dad and she hadn't seen him all day. Now, we didn't think any more of it. I mean, she is 3.5 and we just thought that she was going through a phase and that Mum was the favourite this week. Gracie is generally a good sleeper. She sleeps in her own room and she wakes up occasionally for a cuddle or to be settled back to sleep. Now, she started waking up almost every night and she came into Steve and my bed to sleep with us. She would chitter-chatter for a good few hours and eventually go to sleep, just when it was time for Steve to get up to go to work. And just note that Gracie stopped having a daytime nap when she was around the age of 2. So technically she probably should sleep all through the night. And this is when it starts to get really, really interesting. I knew when Jenny was telling me about this, I'm like, yeah, there's definitely an energetic aspect to what is happening within the home. Now, this sleep disruption went on for a couple of weeks. Steve needs his 8 hours of sleep every night because he has to be fully alert and function properly at work because he's operating heavy machinery. So we decided that I would deal with Gracie when she came into our bed, and Steve would go into Gracie's room to get a good night's sleep. Now, Gracie started to display really unusual behaviours when she came into our bed. Not only was she doing the normal chittering, chattering, but like I said earlier, it was for hours at a time, and she would kick me out of frustration. And she made it very clear that she didn't want me to look at her or even lie on the bed facing her. I had to have my back to her at all times. Now, we're talking in the middle of the night, and this has been going on night after night, and I was exhausted. So I simply went along with it, and I thought to myself, you have to pick your battles. Now, I would drift off to sleep on my side, and when I thought Gracie had drifted off to sleep too, I would turn around to my right side, as this is how I normally sleep, and it's more comfortable for me. No sooner had I turned around to face Gracie that she would be staring at me and would say in a very gruff voice, "Don't look at me," and she would kick me until I turned back around. I was stunned. I would then hear her little voice say, "Mummy, cuddle me." So I would turn around and give her a cuddle, only to be told, "Don't turn around, don't look at me." I just thought she was tired. Like, seriously, she's 3.5 years old and it's 3 a.m. And she's just being a bit of a drama queen. And I was just simply too tired to do anything about her behaviours at that time of the night, or the morning, if you want to look at it that way. And this went on, night after night after night. And at meal times, I noticed too that Gracie would pull the strangest facial expressions while sitting at the kitchen table. Now, they weren't the normal sort of silly, funny, innocent facial expressions that a 3-year-old might create. There was something else in it, like they had a dark, twisted look about them. And when I looked at her, it made me feel very, very uncomfortable. And at other times, Gracie would randomly just burst into tears and sob and sob and sob her little heart out. It was so strange to see this switch in her behaviours, and she simply couldn't tell me what was wrong. Now, Gracie's language changed quite drastically. She started using the word hate a lot, which was totally out of character for her. And she had this really negative attitude at times throughout the day. And again, I thought, is she just going through a 3-year-old phase? Then she would start saying that she hated daycare, and I don't want to go. And she'd be crying and saying that she hated it. It was a real struggle to get her there. And as I've said before, this was not Gracie's normal, happy, loving attitude towards her family and also daycare and playing with her friends there. Now, one night she came into our bed and Steve went down to her bed as usual. And she started chatting away and kicking me and saying, "Don't look at me!" All her usual strange middle-of-the-night behaviours. And suddenly she got out of bed and she walked into her room where Steve was trying to sleep. And she yelled at him in her gruff and angry voice, "Get out of my bed! Get out of my room! Go sleep in the lounge room!" Steve, in his sleepy state, just stood his ground and he ignored her demands. Now, after she'd said her bit to Steve, she just kind of casually turned around and walked back into my bedroom and jumped back into bed with me. And eventually she drifted off to sleep. It was really weird. Like, I was seriously starting to think there is something attached to our daughter. Now, I'm just going to jump in here for a minute. When I went to visit Jenny's family that day, I witnessed Gracie's really odd, strange behaviours and her face pulling. Like, it wasn't the normal sort of face that a 3-year-old might do as something funny, or even when they're angry or tired or upset. It was really quite dark. Seriously, I looked at Jenny and I went, "We've got some attachments here. I need to deal with this." And Jenny knows about this because I've done lots of work for them in their home. We talked about it. Like, seriously, we just sat down and we had a chat. Jenny is very spiritually aware, and we often joke about them, as we call the dark energy beings, as coming from the in-laws as they lived across the road. Now, I observed Gracie throughout the day, while we were having lunch, while we were having a cup of tea, while we had dessert and we had a play. And she was very unsettled, very clingy with Jenny, pulling on her clothes, banging plates at the place where we had lunch. and this sort of dark, mysterious look in her eyes. It was not the normal, funny, little wistful, playful look that her daughter Gracie usually had on her face. Like, I've met Gracie a few times. She's just your average 3-year-old, average happy-go-lucky 3-year-old. Now, most people would think that, all these happenings are just normal 3-year-old behaviours. But Jenny knows her daughter very, very well and recognised that these odd, strange behavioural changes in her had an energetic something about them. They just didn't feel right. When you do this work, when you do this energy work, you just get a sense for energetic issues, especially in someone of that age. Now, I offered to do what I call a check-in on Gracie's energy field. Believe it or not, there were 5 demonic level energy beings, which had come through energy cording to a male from approximately 2 weeks ago. Now, there's generally no males in the house, except Steve, the dad, and Grandpa from across the road doesn't come and visit very often. Now, when I checked where this energetic energy had come from, I found the source. Now, sure enough, they were all coming from Steve, Gracie's dad. Now, Jenny writes, Steve is a country bumpkin. Like, he's an all-round great husband and father, kind and caring. But he's been dealing with some very negative interactions with his elderly parents recently. Steve was working and running the family business as his father had recently had surgery and he'd been out of action. And Steve had been taking his father and mother to appointments and visiting his father when he was in ICU. And all of the work had been piling up and it was really, really stressful time for Steve. It's a complicated family relationship for most families. And when there's illness and there's expectations thrown in on sons and daughters to pick up on the work and to keep everything running, and they've got their own families to run, it makes it really hard on people. And this closeness to his parents and Steve's run-down mind and body state due to the lack of sleep and stress with his parents and at work had made him mentally, emotionally and energetically vulnerable to picking up on all his parents' negative emotions and their energetic hitchhikers. Now, Steve had an energetic clearing from Anna, and we also got the house cleared and the beds at the same time. And it was interesting to see the energetic imprints attached to our beds and also Gracie's bed, which would have contributed to Gracie's disrupted sleep patterns and her negative behaviour. There were large energetic build-ups of sadness, anxiety, burdened, unworthy, hatred, distress, and hostility in both beds. Now, these emotions were witnessed in her behaviours, and everything started to now make total sense. Now, once I did an energetic clearing for Gracie and just moved out, evicted the 5 demonic level beings, her negative behaviour pretty much stopped immediately after her energy clearing. And Jenny writes, she was still in our bed, but she was peaceful and still. And that night she slept all night. And the next morning she said she wanted to go to daycare. And ever since then, she's been the happy, loving little girl that she's always been. Now I'm just going to jump in here for a minute. I talked to Jenny about a week, 2 weeks after the energy clearing was done. And Gracie would occasionally still do the "don't look at me" and some of the negative things that she was doing before. And how I explain this is that when someone has developed habits over a period of time, and this was only sort of a 2-week period for Gracie. I mean, she is 3.5. So she had to undo those behaviours that she'd learned. Because when the demonic level beings were within her energy field, yes, they were manipulating her to do things, And her brain had partially taken on those habits. And then she had to unlearn those habits. Now, I've spoken to Jenny since I did the clearing, since that 2 weeks that we talked about those habits having been developed. And she's not doing it anymore because her brain has had time to retrain itself to getting back into her old, normal, sort of 3.5-year-old habits, if that makes sense. I hope that does make sense for you. But I find this in adults as well, is that when they have had a lot of dark or demonic level beings present within them and they've started to take on particular habits, it takes a while to undo them. Sometimes it's instant for some people. Other people it can take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. One lady, it took her 6 months to fully undo the habits that she developed when she was under that influence of the demonic level beings. Now back to Jenny's writing. Jenny says that Steve and Gracie have now reconnected, and she runs to the door to greet Daddy excitedly when he comes home from work. And they play and they laugh together, which is really great to see. And Steve has noted, since his energy clearing, a positive, uplifting change in his attitude and his energy levels. And Jenny writes that he looked out the window one morning after his energy clearing and happily said, "I feel a lot better now." Now, this experience shows you the power of awareness of behavioural changes in people, especially family members who we spend a huge part of our lives with. Sudden behavioural changes can, of course, be medical or mental health issues. And I never assume that anything is energetic or paranormal until my clients have seen their doctors first. Now here's a bit of an update. Let's jump forward a month. Jenny's messaged me to say that 4 weeks after Steve had his energy clearing, he hasn't absorbed any more of his parents' emotional imprints or dark hitchhikers because his parents are in a better mind and energy state. They're settled and they're happier. And Steve can go about his work on the farm relaxed and is not stressed at all. And isn't it interesting to observe the changes in people's behaviours when they shift from being stressed and drained and energetically depleted to being peaceful and being able to cope with life? Because paranormal beings, the dark or the demonic beings, aren't interested in us when we are happy and enjoying life. There is simply no vibrational food within happiness. And when we live in a higher vibrational emotional state, these beings are just going to go elsewhere. They're going to go and look for their food source within other homes, other places, other people. Oh, and don't forget, if you like the content of this podcast and you don't want to miss any future episodes, please subscribe. And you can share with your friends so we can get the message out there. We can spread the message about these paranormal pranksters and what they get up to in our homes. So in episode 45, I have an interview for you with a fellow paranormal podcaster, Jonathan Phoenix, from his Let Me Tell You a Story podcast. Jonathan lives in the US and shares local stories. He tells of the grey man who warns of impending hurricanes, the dancing spirit lady, the pirate captain, a helpful spirit of a British soldier, and the graveyard that he will never forget. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. and I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.